The cantina's neon lights flickered through thick smoke, casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. Station Nexus 7 was the kind of place where soldiers came to forget wars and civilians came to dissap. The air tasted of burnt ozone and regret. Commander Vexthal sat in the darkest corner, his massive frame hunched over a glass of Rigelian whiskey. His reptilian skin bore the marks of countless battles, laser burns, shrapnel scars, and cybernetic patches where flesh had been torn away. Each scar told a story, but tonight he would tell the one that mattered most. The young journalist slid into the booth across from him, her recording device barely larger than a coin. She was human, which made this conversation both easier and harder. Commander, thank you for agreeing to this interview. Vexthal's yellow eyes studied her face. You're from Earth, Mars colony. Actually, born there after the war ended. She adjusted her device. I'm writing about the Coalition War from the alien perspective. Most humans only know our side of the story. A bitter laugh escaped the old commander's throat. Your side, child. There were no sides. There was the galaxy as we knew it. And then there were humans. Everything else was just details. The journalist leaned forward. What made them so different? In military academies, they teach that humans won through superior tactics and technology. But the casualty reports don't match that narrative. Vexthal drained his glass and signaled for another. The bartender, a 6-armed centaurian, scuttled over with a fresh bottle. Different doesn't begin to cover it. We coalition species had been fighting wars for thousands of years. We knew the rules. Engage at maximum range. Preserve your forces. Retreat when losses exceed 20%. Clean, efficient, logical. He poured another drink, his clawed hands surprisingly steady. Then Earth entered galactic politics. Your ambassadors were polite. Your trade representatives were reasonable. We thought we understood your species. Cautious, diplomatic, probably weak in actual combat. The canteen's background chatter faded as other patrons unconsciously strained to listen. War stories always drew crowds, especially ones involving the legendary human conflicts. The first real engagement was at Kepler Mining Station. Vexthal continued. Barely a military target. Just a few hundred miners extracting rare minerals from an asteroid field. Standard procedure was to demand surrender, accept it, and move on. Simple intimidation mission. His mandibles clicked, the hegemony equivalent of a nervous laugh. I commanded a full battalion. 200 of the finest coalition Marines, supported by air cover and orbital bombardment capabilities. We were facing what intelligence reported as a skeleton security force, maybe 20 humans total. The journalist made notes on her tablet. What happened when you made first contact? We broadcasted the standard surrender demand. Expected immediate compliance. Humans were new to the galaxy. Surely they understood they were outgunned. Vexthal's eyes grew distant. Instead, we got a response from someone calling himself Sergeant Kindeho. His voice was calm, almost friendly. Vexthal paused, remembering. He said, "Thanks for the warning, Commander. We'll be ready for you." Then he cut the channel. We thought it was bravado. The old soldier's scarred face darkened. My tactical officers laughed. 20 humans against 200 coalition Marines. It should have been over in minutes. We had superior firepower, better armor, numerical advantage. Every military computer simulation gave us 97% victory probability. But humans don't fight like military computers think they should. Vexthal's voice dropped. We began our assault at dawn. Standard formation, frontal. Assault with flanking maneuvers. Professional. By the book military operation. He took another drink, savoring the burn. The first sign something was wrong came when our scouts reported no defensive positions, no trenches, no fortified bunkers, no obvious military preparations. Just normal mining operations. The journalist frowned. They weren't defending. Oh, they were defending. Just not the way we expected. Vex the less yellow eyes gleamed with something between respect and terror. Sergeant Kim Deho had turned the entire asteroid into a weapon. Every mining tunnel became a sniper's nest. Every processing plant became a fortress. Every piece of industrial equipment became a bomb. The cantina had grown quieter now. Other conversations dying as patrons listened to the veteran's tale. We landed expecting to face frightened miners with mining lasers instead. We found ourselves fighting the asteroid itself. Tunnels collapsed. When we entered them, machinery exploded when we tried to advance. The very ground beneath our feet became hostile. Vex the less claws scraped against his glass. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the humans themselves. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like people protecting their home. Because that's what they were doing. 6 hours. He whispered, 20 humans held off my entire battalion for 6 hours. Not because they had better weapons or superior training, but because they refused to quit. When we finally reached their last position, we found Sergeant Kim Deho standing in the facility's main reactor chamber, the journalist. Waited, sensing the crucial moment approaching. He was wounded, badly, shrapnel in his chest, burns covering half his body. Should have been dead an hour earlier. But he was still standing, still fighting. Vex the less voice cracked slightly. He looked at me with these human eyes, not afraid, not angry, just determined. Then he said the words that changed everything. What? Did he say, "See you in hell"? Vex the less mandibles clicked rapidly. Then he triggered the detonator. The entire facility went up like a small star. We lost 97 Marines that day, including some of my best officers. The old commander stared into his drink. That's when we learned the first rule of fighting humans. They don't fight to win battles. They fight to make sure you lose the war. The bartender refilled Vex the less glass without being asked. The old commander's hands trembled slightly as he lifted it to his lips. Round the cantina, conversations had completely stopped. Even the gambling tables had gone quiet. After Kepler, High Command decided humans were just lucky. One asteroid base, they said. Desperate tactics from corn miners. Nothing more. Vex the less bitter laugh echoed off the metals. So, they gave me 3 full battle groups and orders to take Arcturus colony. Show these newcomers how real war works. The journalist checked her recording device. The memory banks were filling fast. But she didn't want to miss a single word. Arcturus was a major settlement. Wasn't it? 50,000 civilians, agricultural, world. Mostly. They grew food for half the outer rim territories. Vexthal stared into the amber liquid. We thought it would be easy. Threaten the food supply. Watch them fold. Standard siege warfare. He paused, lost in memory. My fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning. 12 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, and a full Marine division. We established orbital blockade and sent the surrender demand. 48 hours to comply or face bombardment. The Centaurian bartender leaned closer, his 6 arms working automatically while his compound eyes focused on the story. Even he had heard whispers of Arcturus. Their response came from the colony administrator, woman named Park Sojin. Her file said she was a mining engineer before the colonization program. No military training, no combat experience, just a civilian, trying to build a new life on the frontier. Vex the less yellow eyes reflected the cantina's neon lights. She transmitted on an open channel so everyone could hear. Her voice was calm, professional. She said, Commander Vexthal, we've received your ultimatum. We're going to need more time to consider our response. How about we discuss this over dinner? I make excellent kimchi. A few patrons chuckled nervously. The commander's expression remained grim. We thought she was stalling, playing for a time while reinforcements arrived, standard procedure. So we waited, monitored their communications, scanned for incoming ships. Nothing. No rescue fleet. No desperate calls for help. Just normal colony business. The journalist frowned. They weren't trying to escape. That's what confused us. Our sensors showed normal civilian activity. People going to work. Children attending school. Farmers tending crops. Like there wasn't a coalition war fleet in orbit above them. Vexthal's mandibles clicked rapidly. After 72 hours, we began selective bombardment. Hit their communication rays, power stations, transport hubs, still waiting for a surrender. The old soldier's scarred face darkened. Instead of surrender, we got music. They started. Broadcasting on emergency frequencies, ancient human songs. Voices joining together across the colony. We ran the audio through translation software. Expecting battle hymns or propaganda. What were they singing? Work songs. Farming songs. Lullabies. Their grandmothers used to sing. Vexthal's voice grew quiet. Park Sojin's voice rose above the others, clear and strong. She was singing while coordinating defensive positions, literally singing instructions to her people. The commander's claws drummed against the table. 1 week became 2, to became 4. My officers were getting nervous. High command kept asking for status reports. How could 50,000 farmers hold out against a full battle group? They were fighting back. Fighting. Building. Surviving. Every day we knocked down their defenses. They rebuilt them stronger. Destroyed their power grid. They rigged solar collectors from farming equipment. Cut their water supply. They dug wells with mining tools. They turned their entire colony into a fortress. Vexthal's voice carried a note of grudging admiration. But the worst part was their communications. We kept intercepting transmissions, expecting to hear panic, despair, calls for mercy. Instead, we heard Park Sojin giving daily reports like she was running a normal colony meeting. The journalist leaned forward. What kind of reports, Mrs. Chen's baby took his first steps today. The Northfield corn is ready for harvest. We've got 17 wounded coalition prisoners in the medical bay. They're recovering well. Oh, and Commander Vexthal, if you're listening, dinner invitation still stands. The cantina erupted in nervous laughter. Several patrons raised their glasses in an impromptu toast to the dead human commander. She was treating wounded coalition soldiers. The journalist asked, every day. Our casualties from the siege were taken to their medical facilities, fed, treated, healed, while our orbital bombardment continued destroying their homes. Vexthal's voice cracked. We captured some of their people during raids. When we interrogated them, they asked about the welfare of our wounded. Our wounded. The old commander stood abruptly, pacing to the cantina's viewport. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly as the station rotated. 47 days into the siege, my tactical officer reported something impossible. Coalition casualties were recovering faster in human medical facilities than in our own fleet hospitals. How? They were sharing their medical supplies with U.S., while rationing their own food to feed our prisoners better than they fed themselves. Vexthal's reflection stared back from the transparent aluminum. Park Sojin was giving plasma transfusions to wounded coalition Marines while her own medics worked with bandages made from torn clothing. Eng, the journalist's stylus had stopped moving. That's insane, illogical, strategically suicidal. Vexthal turned back to the room. That's what we thought. until we realized it was working. My own troops were starting to question the siege. How do you bombard people who are saving your friends' lives? He returned to his seat, suddenly looking older than his 150 years. On day 48, we finally broke their main defensive line, stormed the colony center expecting to find Park Sojin barricaded in some bunker, ready for a final desperate battle. The cantina held its breath. We found her in the medical. They performing surgery on a coalition sergeant who'd been wounded in our assault. She looked up when we entered, hands covered in his blood, and said, "Commander Vexthal, perfect timing. Could you hand me those surgical clamps? I think I can save his leg." Vexthal's yellow eyes glistened. She operated on him while we held. Her at gunpoint saved his life. Then she stood up, washed her hands, and formally surrendered the colony. But first, she made us promise to continue medical care for all wounded. Coalition and human alike, the silence stretched until the bartender finally spoke. What happened to her? Prisoner exchange. 3 months later, she survived the war, went back to engineering, built some of the finest cities in human space. Vexthal raised his glass in a silent toast. That woman taught us that humans don't just fight with weapons. They fight with their souls, and somehow that made them impossible to defeat. The cantina's atmospheric recyclers hummed in the silence. Even the slot machines had gone quiet, their alien operators forgetting to pull levers as they listened. Vexthal's glass sat untouched, condensation pooling on the metal table. Luna, he whispered the name like a curse. After Arcturus, High Command realized humans wouldn't surrender easily, so they decided to end it quickly. One massive strike at their home system. Break their spirit by threatening Earth itself. The journalist watched his scaled hands tremble. In 30 years of interviewing war veterans, she'd never seen a coalition commander show this much emotion about a human battle. I was promoted after Arcturus, Fleet Admiral. They called it reward for taking the agricultural colony, even though it cost us more ships than the entire previous campaign. Vexthal's bitter laugh carried no humor. They gave me the largest battle fleet in coalition history. 300 warships, 2 million reams, enough firepower to crack a planet. Outside the viewport, a human cargo holodocked with the station. The sight seemed to make the old commander flinch. Lunar Base was their last line of defense before Earth. Orbital fortress built into humanity's original moon. Intelligence said they had maybe 30 ships. All outdated designs from their early space program. Ancient fusion drives, primitive. Weapons, no advanced shielding. A Regelian merchant at the next table leaned closer. 30 against 300, the numbers meant nothing to them. Vexthal's yellow eyes tracked the human freighter through the viewport. Admiral Yi Taisang commanded their defense, Korea military. And like the colonists we'd been fighting, we expected professional conduct, proper military engagement. Maybe even reasonable surrender terms. The commander's scarred face twisted. We jumped into the lunar system expecting to find their fleet deployed in standard defensive formation. Battle lines, tactical positioning, logical placement of assets. Instead, we found chaos. Chaos, thousands of civilian ships fleeing Earth, cargo haulers, passenger liners, private yachts. Mining barges, anything that could fly was loaded with. Refugees and heading for deep space, and protecting them. Vexthal stood abruptly, pacing to the cantina's central display screen. It showed local shipping traffic, mostly peaceful merchant vessels going about normal business. His claws clicked against the metal rail. Yi Taisang's fleet was scattered among the civilian ships, not hiding behind them, protecting them, each human warship positioned to shield evacuation craft from our weapons. They weren't preparing for a battle. They were conducting the largest rescue operation in galactic history. The journalist's stylus moved rapidly across her tablet. How many civilians? 50 million, maybe more. Every transport that could reach orbit was loaded beyond safety limits and running for the outer system. Vexthel's voice grew quiet. My tactical computers couldn't target the human military vessels without hitting refugee ships. A hegemony trader near the bar snorted. Smart tactical move. Use civilians as shields. Vexthel spun around, his massive form suddenly menacing. They weren't using them as shields, you fool. They were saving them. Every human warship was broadcasting civilian transponder codes, making themselves targets to draw our fire away from the evacuation fleet. The trader shrank back as the old commander's battle scars seemed to glow under the neon lights. Yi Taisang opened communications on a wide-band frequency. His message was simple. Coalition fleet, you have come to destroy our world. We understand. But please allow our children to reach safety first. After that, we'll give you the fight you came for. Vexthel returned to his seat, suddenly looking exhausted. High Command ordered immediate engagement. No mercy. No delays. Destroy the human fleet before they could coordinate proper defenses. What happened? We attacked at dawn. Sol system time. 3 battle groups moving in perfect formation. It should have been over in hours. The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly. Instead, we learned what human tactical insanity really looked like. The cantina patrons leaned forward as Vexthel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The first human ship we destroyed was the destroyer Kim Il-sung, Captain Lee Hyojin commanding. She could have run. Her ship was fast enough to escape. Instead, she positioned herself directly between our dreadnought and a refugee transport carrying 20,000 civilians. His scarred hands gripped the table edge. We had no choice but to engage. The plasma cannons tore through her shields. In seconds, but as her ship died, she didn't retreat or surrender. She locked onto a ramming course with our flagship. Ramming course. Her crew had already evacuated to escape pods, all except Captain Lee. She stayed behind to pilot the ship manually, steering the wreckage directly into our command bridge. Vexthel's voice cracked. Her last transmission was an apology to her daughter. Said she was sorry for missing her birthday party. The journalist stopped writing, staring at the old commander in horror. The Kim Il-sung hit us at full velocity, took out our primary command center, killed Admiral Corvin and his entire staff. But that was just the beginning. Vexthel's yellow eyes reflected the cantina's lights like twin suns. Every human ship that died took several of ours with them, not through superior firepower, but through sheer determination. He pulled up star charts on his personal display. Look at this tactical analysis. Each human vessel that engaged us protected an average of 12 refugee ships. They calculated exactly how long they needed to hold position for civilian evacuation, then sold their lives for that exact amount of time. The display showed ship movement patterns during the battle. Human vessels weaving between coalition formations, drawing fire, buying precious minutes for loaded transports to reach hyperspace jump points. Captain Kim Min-woo's cruiser held off an entire battle group for 47 minutes, long enough for 15 refugee ships to escape. His final message was a joke about human food being better than coalition rations. Vexthel's laugh came out as a sob. They were dying and still making jokes. How many civilians escaped? All of them. Every single refugee ship reached safe hyperspace. The old commander's voice filled with something between admiration and terror. 50 million humans evacuated while their fleet died protecting them. Not one civilian transport was lost. The cantina had grown so quiet that the station's life support systems seemed thunderous. Admiral Yi Taisang's flagship was the last to fall, the Zhejiang, an ancient battle cruiser that should have been scrapped decades earlier. It held position at Lunar Base's main docking bay until the final transport cleared the gravity. Well, nevertheless, Scarface showed emotions no coalition species was supposed to feel. When we finally boarded his ship, we found Yi Tai-sung on the bridge, wounded but alive. My officers expected him to beg for mercy or demand prisoner rights. What did he do? He asked about casualties. Coalition casualties. Wanted to know if his people had killed too many of us during the battle. The old commanders. Voice broke completely. He was concerned that human resistance had caused unnecessary coalition deaths. The enemy admiral was apologizing to us for fighting back. The silence stretched until the bartender's nervous cough broke the spell. We won the battle, but lost a third of our fleet. High Command began seriously questioning whether conquering Earth was worth the cost. Vexthel raised his glass in another silent toast. That's when we learned the final lesson about humans. They don't fight to win battles. They fight to protect what they love. And love, it turns out, is the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The cantina's lights dimmed automatically as the station entered its night cycle. Most patrons had drifted away, but a core group remained. Drawn like moths to the flame of Vexthel's terrible memories, the old commander's glass trembled. In his clawed hands, after Luna, the Coalition Council met in emergency session. 17 species, all demanding answers. Vexthel's voice carried the weight of decades. How could 30 primitive human ships destroy a third of the galaxy's most advanced fleet? The hegemony representatives called it impossible. The Regelian admirals claimed our tactics were flawed. The journalist checked her recording device again. The memory cores were nearly full. But she couldn't stop now. This was history being spoken aloud for the first time. High Command's solution was simple. Bypass space battles entirely. Land ground forces on Earth and end human resistance through conventional warfare. The old commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. 3 million coalition Marines, supported by orbital bombardment and atmospheric fighters, the largest invasion force in galactic history. A maintenance worker, some kind of insectoid species. Paused in cleaning nearby tables to listen. Even the janitors knew about Earth's invasion. I commanded the Australian theater. Entire continent. 25 million humans, defended by maybe 50,000 military personnel. The mathematics was simple. 60 coalition soldiers for every human defender. Victory seemed guaranteed. Vexthel stood and walked to the cantina's main display, calling up holographic maps of Earth's southern continent. The blue-green landmass rotated slowly, marked with coalition battle plans from 30 years ago. We made planetfall at dawn on 17 beaches simultaneously. Perfect amphibious assault. Textbook military operation. My tactical computers predicted complete victory within 72 hours. His scarred face reflected in the hologram's glow. The first sign of trouble came when we encountered organized resistance 40 kilometers inland. That's deep for beach defenses, the journalist noted. That's what confused us. Human forces weren't defending the coastline at all. They'd evacuated civilians inland and were fighting a mobile campaign through cities, forests, mountains, every coalition advance met perfectly timed ambushes, then melted away before we could respond. The holographic display zoomed in on Sydney's ruins. Even decades later, the scars of battle were visible from orbit. Major Choi Min-ho commanded the Sydney Defense Sector. Intelligence files said he was a logistics officer before the war, managed supply chains for civilian construction projects. We expected minimal resistance from a paper-pusher playing soldier. Vexthel's claws traced coalition advance routes on the display. Instead, we found every supply depot had been booby-trapped, every bridge mined, every tunnel prepared for demolition. Choi Min-ho had turned the entire city into a maze designed to kill invaders. The old commander's voice grew distant, lost. In memory, we cornered his command post in the ruins of the Opera House, famous human cultural site, reduced to rubble by our bombardment. My assault team expected to find him cowering in some bunker. Where was he, standing in the open, coordinating defensive positions over radio while coalition snipers shot at him? He'd been hit 3 times, shoulder, abdomen, lung. Should have been dead an hour earlier. Vexthal's yellow eyes reflected something between horror and admiration. But he kept talking, kept giving orders, kept fighting. The maintenance worker had stopped pretending to clean, openly listening now. Other species throughout the cantina leaned in as the story continued. I watched him through battlefield optics, blood running down his chest, breathing ragged from the lung wound, but still coordinating artillery strikes on our positions. When we finally stormed the building, he was propped against a wall, too weak to stand, still directing his troops. By radio, what did he say when you captured him? Asked if his people had made it to the evacuation points. Not about himself, not about surrender terms or prisoner treatment. Just wanted to know if the civilians got away safely. Vexthal's mandibles clicked rapidly. Then he passed out from blood loss. Our medics said he should have died 6 hours earlier. The holographic display shifted to show other battle zones across the continent. Red markers indicated coalition. Casualties, blue showed human defensive positions. The pattern was unmistakable. Humans trading their lives for time, space, and civilian evacuations. But Choi Min-ho wasn't unique. We found the same pattern everywhere. Private Yun-na had been paralyzed by shrapnel in the spine during the Darwin bombardment. Our sensors detected her crawling across a battlefield, dragging ammunition containers to human positions. The journalist's stylus had stopped moving, crawling, for 6 kilometers, through active combat zones, under artillery fire, with a shattered spine. When my soldiers found her, she was still trying to reach the front lines. Asked them to carry the ammunition the rest of the way since she couldn't make it. Tears, actual tears, began forming in Vexthal's alien eyes. The sight shocked everyone in the cantina. Coalition species didn't cry, especially not veteran commanders. She said someone had to do it. Someone had to get supplies to the soldiers holding the line. Her exact words, "Someone has to do it, and I'm someone." The old commander's voice cracked. A 19-year-old girl with a broken back, trying to save her friends by crawling through hell. The cantina had grown completely silent. Even the background music from the gambling area had stopped. The moment that broke us came 3 weeks into the campaign. We were intercepting human communications, looking for tactical intelligence, troop movements, strategic planning. Instead, we found something else entirely. Vexthal returned to his seat, suddenly looking ancient beyond his years. The human soldiers were trapped in Perth's ruins. Brother and sister Han Min-jun and Seo-jun. Their unit had been cut off during our advance, surrounded by coalition forces. No chance of rescue, no chance of escape. They were going to die, and they knew it. The journalist waited, sensing the crucial moment approaching. We recorded their final conversation, expected military intelligence, maybe tactical information about human positions. Instead, we heard them talking about home. The old commander's scaled hands shook as he continued. Min-jun told his sister about their mother's kimchi recipe, how she would get angry if they didn't eat enough vegetables. Seo-jun laughed about their father's terrible singing in the shower, how he thought he was some kind of opera star. Vexthal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They talked about feeding stray cats behind their apartment building, about a tree they used to climb as children, about stupid movies they watched together on weekends. The silence stretched until someone's breath became audible. These two humans, surrounded by enemies, facing certain death, spent their last hours talking about the most ordinary, beautiful parts of being alive. Not military glory, not revenge against the coalition, not even fear of dying, just love, pure, simple love for the life they'd lived. The old commander wiped his eyes with the back of his clawed hand. Minjan's last words to his sister were about a promise to meet her at their favorite restaurant after the war ended. Even knowing they were going to die, he was making plans for a future that couldn't exist. What happened to them? They died fighting, held their position until our forces overran it. But their conversation had been broadcast on open channels. Every coalition soldier in the sector heard it. Vexthal's voice grew haunted. My own Marine started asking questions. How do you kill people who love life that much? How do you destroy something so beautiful? The journalist realized she was crying too. The war ended soon after, within months, not because we couldn't win militarily, but because we'd learned something terrible about humans. They weren't brave because they felt no fear. They were brave because they carried more love than any species should be able to bear, and they refused to let it die. Vexthal raised his glass one final time. Han Minjan and Seojan taught us that humans don't fight for conquest or glory. They fight for the right to come home to the people they love, and love, we discovered, is the most terrifying weapon in the universe. The station's night cycle deepened, casting longer shadows across the cantina. What had started as background chatter from dozens of species had become complete silence. Every patron, from the smallest Centaurian traders to the massive hegemony dock workers, sat transfixed by the old commander's tale. Vexthal's empty glass caught the neon light like a prism, casting rainbow patterns on his scarred hands. The weight of 30 years seemed to press down on his shoulders as he prepared to finish the story that had haunted him since the war's end. The Earth campaign lasted exactly 47 days. He said, his voice barely audible, on day 48. I received the most unexpected communication of my military career. It came directly from Coalition High Command, bypassed all normal channels, highest encryption level. The journalist's recording device hummed softly in the silence. Rauma, cantina, drinks set forgotten as everyone strained to hear. The message was simple. Immediate ceasefire. All forces withdraw to orbital positions. Await further orders. No explanation. No tactical reasoning. Just stop fighting. Vexthal's mandibles clicked nervously. I thought it was a mistake. We were winning. After all, human resistance was breaking. Their major cities were under coalition control. A hegemony trader near the bar whispered something to his companion. Vexthal's yellow eyes fixed on them like targeting lasers. But we weren't winning, were we? We were destroying ourselves from the inside out. Every coalition soldier who survived that campaign came back changed. They'd seen too much, understood too much about what we were really fighting. The old commander stood slowly, his artificial joints whirring softly. Round the cantina, maintenance robots had stopped their cleaning cycles. Their simple AI apparently programmed to recognize important moments. The withdrawal order came. After a coalition intelligence analysis reached the council chambers, not battle reports or casualty figures, but psychological profiles of our own troops. 40% were showing signs of what humans call moral injury. Our own soldiers were breaking down because they couldn't reconcile fighting people who showed such basic decency. Vexthal walked to the main viewport, staring out. At the stars, a human cargo vessel was departing the station, its fusion drives painting brief auras across the cosmic darkness. The final report that ended the war wasn't written by generals or politicians. It was written by a coalition psychiatrist named Dr. Velta. She'd been treating soldiers returning from Earth, trying to understand why so many were requesting discharge from active duty. The journalist followed him to the viewport. What did she find? That humans had weaponized something we didn't even have a word for in most coalition languages. The closest translation is moral courage, but that doesn't capture it. Humans fight for principles they can't even see, for people they'll never meet, for futures they might not live to enjoy. The commander's reflection stared back from her, transparent aluminum, scarred and ancient beyond his years. Dr. Velter interviewed thousands of coalition veterans. She found the same pattern everywhere. Soldiers who couldn't sleep because they remembered human medics treating coalition wounded. Marines who requested transfers because they'd seen human civilians sharing food with enemy prisoners. Pilots who refused bombing missions because they'd heard human parents singing lullabies to their children during air raids. His clawed hand pressed against the viewport. We were breaking our own army by forcing them to fight people who consistently chose compassion over survival. Every act of human kindness was like psychological warfare against our troops. The cantina had become a temple of silence. Even the slot machines had gone quiet, their alien operators mesmerized by the story. The final incident happened in New Zealand, Major Choi Minho's sector, 3 days before the withdrawal order. A coalition medical transport had crashed during an evacuation mission. 27 wounded soldiers, including my own nephew, trapped in hostile territory. Vexthel's voice grew thick with emotion. Human forces found them first. We monitored the communications, expecting to hear execution orders or ransom demands instead. We heard human medics coordinating emergency surgery, using their own medical supplies to save coalition lives. Your nephew survived, along with every other coalition soldier on that transport. They were treated, fed, healed, and returned to our lines under a white flag. The human commander who authorized the rescue was Major Choi Minho himself, wounded and dying, still making decisions to save enemy lives. The old commander turned back to face the cantina. Every eye was fixed on him, every species represented in that room hanging on his words. That's when High Command realized the truth. We weren't fighting a war anymore. We were fighting a mirror that showed us everything we weren't, everything we could never be. Humans weren't defeating us with superior weapons or tactics. They were defeating us by being better than us. The silence stretched until someone's breathing became audible. The bartender's 6 arms had stopped moving entirely, cleaning cloth forgotten in one hand. The withdrawal took 6 months, not because of logistics or military planning, but because coalition soldiers kept requesting permission to help with reconstruction efforts. Our own troops wanted to stay and help rebuild what we'd destroyed. Vexthel returned to his table, but didn't sit. Instead, he stood like a lecturer addressing students, his scarred form commanding attention without effort. 30 years later, human colonies are scattered across the galaxy, not as conquerors or occupiers, but as neighbors. They build hospitals that treat all species. They establish schools that teach coalition languages alongside their own. They create communities where any being can find a home. The journalist looked up from her notes, and the coalition changed. Every species touched by that war learned something about ourselves. We learned that strength without compassion is just cruelty with organization. We learned that intelligence without empathy is just sophisticated barbarity. The old commander's yellow eyes swept across the cantina, taking in the diverse crowd of species that had gathered to hear his story. Look round this room. Hegemony traders sharing drinks, Rigelian merchants, Centaurian mechanics joking with Arcturian pilots, This peace didn't come from treaties or negotiations. It came from understanding what humans showed us about the universe. He paused at the edge of the table, one clawed hand resting on its surface. Humans taught us that survival isn't about being the strongest species or having the best weapons. It's about being willing to carry impossible burdens for people you've never met, fight for principles you can't prove, and love things that might not love you back. The cantina's atmospheric recyclers seemed louder in the profound silence that followed. You want to know what really ended the war? It wasn't military defeat or political negotiation. It was the moment when Coalition High Command realized that humans were fighting for something we'd forgotten existed. They were fighting for the right to come home to the people they loved, in a universe where love was possible. Vexthal picked up his empty glass, studying it like it contained the secrets of the cosmos. Major Choi Minho died 3 days after the ceasefire, succumbing to wounds he'd carried for weeks, while still coordinating refugee evacuations. Private Yoon Na survived her injuries but never walked again. She spent her recovery teaching Coalition prisoners to read human languages so they could write letters to their families. Tears flowed freely down the old commander's scaled cheeks now. They rebuilt their world, not with hatred or vengeance, but with the same stubborn hope that had carried them through the war. Every human city that rose from the ashes included memorials to coalition dead alongside their own. The journalist realized she was crying too, along with half the cantina's patrons. Species that supposedly didn't experience emotion were wiping eyes and mandibles with whatever appendages they possessed. That's the real truth about humans, Vexthal concluded, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades worth of understanding. They don't fight because they're fearless. They fight because they're more afraid than any species should be able to bear, and they choose to love anyway. He moved toward the cantina's exit, then paused one final time. Every human soldier I ever faced was terrified. Terrified of dying, terrified of failing, terrified of losing the people who mattered to them. But they fought anyway, not despite their fear, but because of it. They were afraid of a universe where love couldn't triumph over hate, where hope couldn't survive in darkness, where ordinary people couldn't do extraordinary things. The old coalition veteran stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure from history preparing to return to obscurity. Humans discovered something the rest of us had forgotten. Some things are worth being afraid for. Love isn't weakness. It's the most dangerous force in the galaxy, because it makes the impossible seem reasonable, the unbearable seem manageable, and the ordinary seem heroic. As Vexthal disappeared into the station's corridors, the cantina remained frozen into blow. The journalist stared at a recording device, realizing she'd just documented something more important than a war story. She'd captured humanity's gift to the galaxy, the understanding that hope wasn't naive optimism, but the most sophisticated weapon ever developed. The war had ended 30 years ago, but its real victory was still spreading through the cosmos. Every species that heard this story would carry it forward, ensuring that the galaxy never forgot the lesson written in human blood and tis: love conquers all, not through force or strategy, but through the simple, radical act of choosing to care about tomorrow, even when today seems impossible to survive. In the end, humans hadn't just won a war. They'd won the right to come home to a universe where love was possible, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. ***, the end ***.